أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فوضوا أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولنبلونكم بشيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Question: why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us natural disasters? Are they a test or are they something else? My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, here in Florida, if you're hearing my voice here or across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As you can quite evidently tell, we are going through a hurricane, and alhamdulillah, I pray that you and your families are in the best of spirits and in the best of the safety of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His aman. And I pray that inshallah we weather this storm together, inshallah, in all of the best of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace. It's a bit of a different format, but inshallah we get a moment to reflect together on some of these very important elements of the equation in terms of where we are spiritually and how can we use these moments of reflection to grow. Very succinctly in this very important but also the Shabbir Jum'ah conversation, I want to discuss with you, why does Allah give us these tests and these trials, and what are trials and what are punishments, and are there opportunities perhaps that Allah even is giving us? So that's one thing that I want to look at. Number two, why does our mindset matter? Does our mindset matter at all in terms of how do we look at things? Do we look at them as predestined? Do we look at them as free will? Do we look at them as something else? Does it matter the lens by which we look at things, and how important is that? Number three, does the methodology that is often preached from pulpits across the world actually have an impact on how people operate? That is, if there is a focus predominantly on the hereafter only, does that have an effect on the populace and the audience? If there's a focus perhaps only on this world, does that have an impact as well? And perhaps is there a balance? And how important is it to balance the equation and see things in a centrist, moderate approach? The next thing that I want to look at is with respect to what are the kinds of tests that Allah may give us and how to know and identify them, and also what are the things and the tools that Allah has given us at the next level in terms of trying to solve these problems. How can we solve them? That is, how can we go through spiritual tests and trials and difficulties and adversities that we may be dealing with in our lives, and what tools has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given us in order to deal with and actually be successful on the other end. And finally, of course, we will remember and recollect that ultimate test and trial of Abu Abdullah on the plains of Karbala, being at Shabbir Jum'ah and being at a moment to remember our marhumin and also to reflect on our own mortality. This is our agenda for the brief moments that we are together in this conversation. Wherever you are, here in Florida or across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, from the bottom of your heart, send a salawat on Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Again, at the first level, I pray that Allah keeps you and your family in the best of health and the best of safety. And inshallah, you are in our du'as, and please do keep us and our family in your du'as as well. The first thing that I want to discuss here is with respect to this concept of natural disasters and what goes through our lives. Oftentimes, you may have heard in the past, or sometimes even still, that these natural disasters that may occur, they may happen as a result of, for example, sins that have occurred. They may happen as, for example, some adhab of Allah. They may happen as a result of X, Y, and Z. And oftentimes, when people hear this, some people say, oh, is that really the case? And others begin to be a little skeptical perhaps with respect to this. What is the reality of this, and how is it that we can actually try to address this matter? The first thing that we need to understand with respect to this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His mercy is not trying to prioritize punishing anyone. He's not prioritizing trying to harm anyone. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the primary element is His grace. We would not exist had it not been for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's immeasurable mercy upon us, Allah's grace upon us, Allah's love and compassion upon us. We would not exist. So we need to keep that at the forefront of our minds. But with respect to this concept, when we come to the Quran al-Majid and Furqan al-Hamid, what does it tell us about the different ways in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may give us experiences in our lives in order for us to reflect, or perhaps we may invite these experiences into our life? What is the reality of the matter? And there's a few words that you need to know from the Quranic lens in order to understand this. And these words are, for example, the word musiba. Musiba is a word that's often used in the Quran, and it refers to, perhaps a closer word in English would be affliction. And that is something that may come in one's life. So this is a term that's used in the Quran. Now again, the parallel between all of these is the concept of test or trial or tribulation or something of that nature. So musiba is used. For example, the verse that I recited at the beginning, the first part talks about one word that we'll come to momentarily, and then the next one talks about this idea of a affliction that may come in someone's life. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. This idea of the verse 155 and 156 of Surah Baqarah, the second chapter of the Quran, that I've actually been reflecting on in the past few lectures, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ, that most surely you will be something. We'll come to that in a moment, because that's the second phase. You will be something with fear and hunger and loss of wealth and your lives and your children, offspring. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. 156, where He says, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and those who have been afflicted, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. After they've been afflicted, they say, surely we are from Allah, and to Him we shall return. So one is affliction. But affliction itself, which is the first form we want to discuss from the Quranic perspective, itself can actually have a few meanings. For example, affliction can be affliction that is brought on by yourself. Affliction can be affliction that comes in another form. For example, affliction, the first kind, is that affliction which comes to us from our own doing. I didn't study for my exam, I didn't get the grade I wanted, for example. I didn't do the hard work to apply for the job, for example. I didn't get the job. I didn't do the work to lay the seeds for the business. I didn't get the result that I wanted. That is affliction that may be brought on by oneself. And in that case, we should first realize that perhaps this is a learning point for us, a point of learning, a lesson that we can learn from this, and even that can be some opportunity that we implement in our life, that we don't repeat that mistake again, or we learn from that experience. So one element of that is the affliction that comes onto us. But remember, inna ma'al usri yusra, as the Quran tells us, verily with this notion of difficulty or hardship comes ease. Oftentimes, sometimes you will find translators, and this is why perhaps the translation needs attention. Sometimes translators say, verily after hardship is ease. But many commentators emphasize that ma'a means with, which means that with that hardship is coming some grace and some ease. And it's important for us to realize that in every difficult situation, there is a silver lining for us to reflect on, and we should be cognizant of that. So this is the first type of affliction or musibah, self-induced. Number two is the affliction that may happen as a result of something that is a natural disaster, what we are perhaps experiencing today. And that is this idea in the last 24 hours, I should say. This affliction, which is a moment of an earthquake or a natural disaster of some form, a hurricane, a tornado, something of this nature. Now, it's important to keep in mind with respect to that, these are elements of the equation that may be there, but we may also have an element of responsibility. This is where climate change comes into the equation. I say this for the next generation in particular, who hear or may hear speakers who are Muslim speakers, for example, from pulpits around the Muslim world, who say, for example, when a flood happens or some type of calamity ensues, that this is due to the sins of the people, and this is a result of that happening. And there may have not been anyone to explain to that respective speaker that, the reality of the matter is that we live in a world where there are cause and effect, and there's a world in which we have some responsibility, and it's important to know that. This may be one type of natural disaster. That is, we are not taking care of the environment. It's leading to increased, for example, water or melting of ice, which is leading to higher levels of water, which is leading to perhaps higher pressures of flooding. But at the same time, there may be other natural causes, which are moments for us to reflect. Now, in these types of afflictions, the difficulty that is there, there's also an opportunity. And that opportunity is that we can actually pause and break out of our normal routine. We can break out of our normal pattern. What does that mean? Sometimes in life, you need something to disrupt your pattern in order to cause you to pause and reflect. And this is one of the most important lessons of life. And that means that oftentimes we can spend 1 day or 2 days or 3 days which eventually become weeks, which eventually become months, which become years. And we think we're on a path of success. And perhaps we may not even realize until our deathbed, if we do realize, that we may have been squandering our life away. We may have been wasting away our talents. We may have had many other opportunities to do amazing things in life, and yet we only tapped into a very small percentage of the infinite potential Allah had given us in terms of accomplishing amazing things. Allow me to explain. There are people in the world, for example, who have accomplished great things. They've become, for example, doctors or entrepreneurs, or they've done amazing successful things in life. But they may not realize that that is just one step in the ladder, and there's so much more to do. I'm remembering the author Khalid Hosseini of The Kite Runner and several other books. And this same author is a physician by training. He's a doctor, but he also ended up being a very successful writer and perhaps many other things in life that we may not be aware of. What I'm trying to invite you to think is, you may be very good at one domain, but that may not be the only domain, and something can disrupt your pattern to help you understand maybe there's more to life. You may find in the history of the world there are many entrepreneurs who actually did fairly well, or people who were doing well financially, but they paused and reflected, and something disrupted their patterns. They say, for example, Jeff Bezos was doing very well financially. He was in a very lucrative position at D.E. Shaw on Wall Street, and he was made the youngest partner, but he said, no, I've seen the writing on the wall with respect to the internet emerging, and I know what I need to do. He had also read, of course, the book Remains of the Day, which perhaps broke his pattern and disrupted the pattern of his behavior in terms of saying, look, the book was about a driver who spent his whole life driving. At the end of his life, he faced immense regret. Now, that doesn't mean that one who drives is not living an honest living, and that's something that's immensely valuable, especially if someone reflects, and perhaps the time in driving led him to reflect on that. Nonetheless, he said that I need to do more. And when Jeff Bezos understood that main idea, he said, there is so much more in terms of what I can do. So he said, I need to take this quote-unquote risk and go westward to build this company. But the reality is, you may not realize that the risk may even be in staying exactly where you are. The prophets took risks. Ibrahim, Nuh, Rasulullah, Musa, all of the prophets took a risk. They put their ego on the line, so to speak. They put their reputation on the line. They put so many things on the line in the eyes of the people, but they were concerned with only one set of eyes, the metaphorical set of eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And similarly, you and I should be aware of that. This hurricane may give us an opportunity to break the pattern and stop and pause and reflect on what are our priorities in life. That family that I may be working so hard around the clock for, maybe they're my priorities. Maybe it's time for us to even reflect on the other side. Inshallah, we'll weather the storm, and inshallah, in the coming days, things will not be as bad, inshallah, and things will be, for example, the damage will be minimal, I pray. But at the same time, this is a moment for us to reflect and not be complacent. That day that I have, this invites us to reflect on our own mortality, that how long will I be on this planet? And have I prioritized the most important things in my life? Have I prioritized my family? Have I prioritized my children? Have I prioritized my parents? Have I prioritized my spouse? Have I prioritized my loved ones? We sometimes go through life and we don't tell the people that we love the most that we love them. We don't stop to say that. We don't stop to actually acknowledge and appreciate the relationships in our life. And that is perhaps not the most fulfilling way to be. I want you to stop and tell your loved ones, your family, your closest friends that you appreciate them, you love them, you value them, and that they matter in your life. Because that's one of the biggest regrets that people have on their deathbed, that I wish I spent more time with my family. I wish I had prioritized the people that mattered more. I wish, for example, I lived a life true to myself. Many times people don't live lives that are true to themselves. We live lives that are perhaps in the interest of what other people think, in the interest of what other people may, for example, we think what other people want, and we may not even have validated that. So it's important that these moments give us a moment to reflect on what it is that are the priorities in life, and am I on the right track? I remind you, for those who remember my past lectures, that moment in the life of Alfred Nobel that caused him to wake up, that jolted him. Many people are not as fortunate to have that moment in life. We need something to disrupt the pattern, to realize that there's something bigger than us, that Allah is in control, and it's important to reflect on that. So this is the second element of afflictions that may be natural in nature, and those natural ones may have two causes. One that we have induced on society and the world, and the other being a moment of reflection that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's system necessitates that. So that's another cause and another variation of musibah. The third, or affliction. The third element of the equation is affliction that is induced by others. And that is one of the biggest tests that one may go through in life. And that is an affliction that someone else causes, an affliction that is caused by a zalim or a tyrant ruler, for example, an affliction or musibah that is caused by maybe having to deal with a difficult neighbor, having to deal with a difficult customer, having to deal with someone who is making our lives more difficult. And this is where Allah is at judgment, and Allah is the one who judges, and we don't know the intricacies of the matter, but at the same time know that Allah said that we will be tested in terms of dealing with the trials and the tribulations that others may induce on us. Now, that doesn't mean that person or that entity or that individual who is causing the affliction will not be held accountable. Rest assured, that's why in Islam we have this concept of this world and the akhirah, that ultimate justice will be done by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But at the same time, know that Allah is watching the entire scenario. When we relate this to Karbala and Imam Hussein, Yazid was responsible for those tasks that he ordered to happen, and he was the main person in that regard. So that was difficulty and adversity, or affliction, you should say, one may say, that was imposed due to that individual. Similar with Fir'aun and Namrud and the likes. These are afflictions that happen at the cause of tyrants, but at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a witness over all of this. This is the first category of musibah, or afflictions. The second, and I invite you to be very diligent in terms of the translations and the details, and I invite myself to do the same, because in modern Arabic there may be differences versus the Quranic Arabic. We're trying to focus on the Quranic context here, and in the Quranic context, the second category is a bala. Now, bala, we may have a traditional understanding of it, and there is a basis for that in modern or in other forms of Arabic, but in the Quranic context, you will find, as the verse suggests, 155 of Surah Baqarah, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ. That most surely you will be tried, you will be tested. So this second form, or bala, refers to a test or a trial. And in this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may actually be giving you and I an opportunity to excel. I hope you realize that theme, that in every difficulty, in every challenge, in every disaster or any other thing of that nature, there is an opportunity for you and I to excel, an opportunity for you and I to go to that higher level. As Iqbal, the poet Allama Iqbal, gives in his analogy of the Shaheen and the eagle, the turbulence, the winds are not to demoralize the falcon or the eagle, but rather to inspire him or her to soar higher, to go to higher levels. Until we are tested, we don't know our abilities. Until we are tested, we don't know our capacity. As I read just the other day, a beautiful quote, that pressure is a privilege. Now you may say, pressure is a privilege? How is that? In fact, you'll find some of the coaches of the world, they actually bring that to light, that pressure is a privilege in the sense that pressure means that someone believes in you. Someone says that you can do it. Someone is expecting something of you. We don't expect things from people that we don't aspire them to go to high levels. So when you are feeling pressure, on one level, yes, there may be some anxiety in there, but at the same time, there should be a sense of gratitude that Allah has given us the ability to have 2 eyes, 2 ears, a mind to utilize the strength and courage to be able to do things and to achieve amazing things through our intellect and our wisdom that Allah has bestowed upon us. So pressure is a privilege in that regard, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that it's something that's going to be a cakewalk. It doesn't mean that it's going to be very simple. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be easy. There are going to be tests, and there are, of course, levels of this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He gave Ibrahim his trial or test, it was to elevate his position, and Ibrahim passed. At the same time, you will notice with respect to this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may give you and I tests in order to elevate ourselves spiritually. For example, in the context of a hurricane, did you and I do the right thing? Did we, for example, make sure that we made preparations? Or for example, did we make sure that we helped people as much as possible? Did we make sure that, for example, we could reach out to people and reach out to more people and ask them, are they okay? Is there anything we can do for you? Is there anything I can do for you? Is there any help that we can do? All of these may be opportunities for us to elevate ourselves in terms of spirituality and in terms of getting closer proximity to Allah. If we take those same 5 ways that Allah is saying that you will be tried and tested and trials will be given to you through fear, khawf, ju, hunger, naqs min al-amwal, loss of wealth, anfus, yourselves or your lives, and thamarat, the fruits, that is your children, your legacies. In each one, there is difficulty, no doubt that there may be pain associated and discomfort. But of course, on the other side of discomfort is also growth. Now, going through this difficulty of fear or hunger, or for example, loss of wealth, all of these things may strengthen you on the other side. And you may realize that that fear that you thought was huge and building in your mind, when you actually overcame it, maybe gave that speech, maybe gave that presentation, maybe embarked on that business venture, at the end of the day, you realize that it wasn't as bad as you may have imagined, and at the same time, it made you stronger. Another example is hunger. We experience hunger in Shahr Ramadan. We experience hunger, for example, in the months or the days that we fast throughout the year. But maybe they make us stronger on the other side to be more resilient and also more compassionate and feel for other people. That's something that we need to really think about, especially with this hurricane, that we may be blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have consistent shelter. We may be blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have a community to rely upon. Many people don't have that. So we should be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a moment of reflection in order for us to understand these dynamics that we often just pass through. Remember, the sun coming out in the morning every single day is a miracle, but we take it for granted. And sometimes we need something to disrupt that pattern, to allow us to live life again with new eyes, with new ears, as if we're living life anew, afresh. As the Ahlul Bayt tell us, An-nasu niyamun, that is, mankind is asleep. When we die, we wake up. So this idea of Have you woken up yet? Have I woken up yet? Or are we still in a slumber? Are we still in a sleep? This is what these difficulties invite us to do. And once, inshallah, we are successful in being patient and resilient and grateful in those difficult circumstances, because there are different levels. There are sabirin, there are shakirin, the people who are thankful. Allah may elevate our levels spiritually. If you remember the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Yusuf these tests, where at the first level, when he sees the dream where there are these stars prostrating towards him, he has to ask his father Yaqub, what is the interpretation? But eventually through the journey, when he ends up in Egypt, he ends up eventually interpreting other people's dreams, in, for example, the prison and the likes. And the ulama say that this was a gift that was given to Yusuf after he passed his spiritual tests. For example, the test with Zulaykha and the likes. These types of things elevate the position of a human being in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and bestow the gifts of Allah on him or her in their lives. And the gifts may not be material necessarily. They may be that, but they may also be the gift of tranquility in the heart, the gift of peace of mind, the gift of happiness, the gift of contentment, the gift of valuing our family, the gift of appreciating our loved ones, the gift of being happy in life. How many people in life, they may be going through immense growth in terms of material wealth. And although that may be good and that's very important, at the same time, they may not be content in life. Now, contentment may be a double-edged sword. Contentment, what I mean in this context, is not the contentment in growth. I mean the contentment in terms of, are you satisfied? In terms of where you are, in terms of your spirituality, in terms of your happiness, in terms of your well-being, ultimately. These are important moments to reflect on. And if we do, then Allah will gift us and bless us with that. The third level after musibah and bala is that of adhab. Adhab is something which is a punishment, according to the ulama and mufassirin of the Quran. Now, the adhab that emerges there is something that may be a punishment from Allah to either wake up a nation, to wake up a people, or perhaps ultimately to punish them extensively. So the examples that are given here are the examples of Nuh alayhi salam and the Ark of Noah and the flood, or other examples of the people of Shu'aib and others in the Quran, and Lut and the likes. And these tests that are punishments that are given. Now, the ulama state that after the mercy of mankind, that is the mercy on the universe, rahmatan lil alameen, Rasulullah, Allah, as the mercy of Rasulullah, Allah has put a stop to finishing off nations the way that he did in the Old Testament or the Bible, and in some chapters in the Quran, in some verse of the Quran, the same way that Nuh and his people, for example, they were ultimately punished. That adhab, or those types of adhab, due to the mercy of Rasulullah, have been put on hold, and they are not happening anymore because we are considered the ummah of Rasulullah. So if those types of tests don't happen anymore, well, or punishments I should say, then what type of adhab may happen? And the ulama say it may be those adhab which are inviting us to reflect on the state of affairs. There are traditions and narrations from the school of the Ahlul Bayt that you will find that actually indicate that Allah will make certain things happen in society, perhaps, if mankind and the people in the community are not just and fair and equitable, and they are not doing the right thing. For example, if there are certain moral conduct within society, for example, there are narrations that say the prices begin to go up and up, which is interesting that these narrations were being said at that time, especially in a time, and the irony of the inflation that we're experiencing, that prices will continue to go up. Or for example, people will not live as long lives. These are also found in the traditions, and these are things for us to reflect on. Or for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test people in other ways. But that is not for you and I to decide that this is the reason and that. And the point that I want to drive at here is we often point our own conjectures and say that this person may be suffering or this person is being punished by Allah. There is no place for us to be the one who says that, because we have no idea about the reality of the matter. It may be that we think in our mind that it's a punishment, and the reality of the matter is in fact that this is a spiritual, for someone in particular, this may be a spiritual journey journey, that Allah is allowing them and inviting them to rise up, even if someone is going on the seemingly wrong path. The example of Hur is in front of us, where he was going on the absolute wrong path, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspired his heart, and he had the goodness within him, and he changed his trajectory, and he accepted the guidance. The guidance comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The question is our heart and our mind receptive to the guidance? Hur's heart was receptive to it. Others perhaps was not. And the reason why sometimes it's not receptive is due to sins, due to us covering our hearts with different layers of things which are moving us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why one of the meanings of trial and test and bala, as per Dua al-Qumel that we recite on Thursday nights, is that it is the separation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the mufassirin, the commentators of the du'as comment on, that it is perhaps the greatest bala is distance, spiritual distance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As Ibrahim says, Inni dhahibun ila Rabbi sayahdini. I am going unto my Lord. He will guide me. That is what you and I need to adopt, to fall onto, to go onto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this spiritual journey. Verily and most surely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide you and I. But a final thing that I want to draw as we come to our conclusion to reflect on is this, that look, how we look at things matters. And it's very important to notice this, because historically there has been different views in Islam on predestination and free will. Now I want to give an example. Sociologists comment on this. And by the way, if I give an example of a community, that doesn't mean I fully endorse everything the community says, and that doesn't mean that there may not be places to criticize certain things. Every community has pros and cons. Every community has its own strengths and weaknesses. But I'll give you the example. Sociologists say that the view of Judaism on emphasis on this world versus the next world may have an impact on their success or seeming success in this world. And they say that Judaism actually, historically, Judaism did not have and does not have a concept of the hereafter. It is this world and that's it. Every 6,000 years, seemingly, things repeat. Now, modern scholars in Judaism have come up with a different interpretation, and they say that no, there is some concept of a hereafter. But what this leads to, what sociologists argue, is an intense emphasis on making the most of this life. Now, what may have happened in the last few centuries in the Muslim world, and maybe even longer than that in some cases, is that we took the complete opposite end. That is, total focus on the hereafter. And partly to blame maybe scholarship, and partly to blame maybe the populace. There may be many people who are stakeholders and who to blame. There's never a shortage of people to blame. But I think more productive may be for us to reflect on ourselves, and for me to reflect on myself and say that, is it that Allah just wanted me to pack up all life here and just focus on the hereafter and not live in this world? Or did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want me to use this world as a platform for success in the hereafter? And that is, how is someone going to tolerate the eternal abode if they cannot tolerate this material world that is transient? How can you take on the infinite world if you're not able to handle the finite world? This notion that everything, and one of these, the cost effects of this may have been that people said that maybe we don't have to focus so much on scientific development, technological development, entrepreneurial development, and X, Y, and Z. And so this is one theory and hypothesis that many thinkers have. Now, at the same time, we should not be entirely just focused on this. This is why Islam is so beautifully balanced, that it has this world as well as the akhirah, and justice ultimately will be done either here or in the akhirah. So don't think that if someone is cheating and stealing and doing something wrong, that they won't have to pay a price ultimately. Ultimately, the judgment is with Allah. But here's one thing that we need to consider in terms of natural disasters once again, and that is it something that Allah has decreed and there's nothing for us to do about it, and it's something that's totally predestined and predetermined? Or is there something for us to learn in this? I say this because when certain natural disasters happen, for example, floods in Pakistan, or for example, if you remember the tsunami which happened over Indonesia and Thailand in the Indian Ocean region in this area, At that point in time, there were people who were even Islamic scholars who were saying this is due to this sin, and this is destined by God. And the challenge with that is we often may not be understanding the Islamic perspective on this regard. It's important for us to know, even our scholars, and this is a point that I've been harping on, and I invite you to please reflect on that, and that is this. Scholarly differences are scholarly differences. That does not mean that one does not respect an individual. Allow me to explain. Even in our tradition, you will find that there have been scholars and their students have disagreed with them. That does not mean that they don't have respect. Respect and scholarship are two different things. Ilm and adab, these are important elements that have a relation, but at the same time, scholarly difference of opinion is something that is necessary and helps to lead to growth. I'll give you an example. Shaykh al-Saduq, one of our great scholars, his student Shaykh al-Mufid. Shaykh al-Saduq is one of the great scholars of Shi'ism, but he had a view which several views which many contemporary scholars don't agree with, and many scholars right after his time didn't agree with. Now remember, Shaykh al-Saduq is living in the 900s AD, that is the 10th century, and his contemporary who lives a bit after him is Shaykh al-Mufid, who's his student, and he's right into the 10th and right into the 11th century. And these views were different. Shaykh al-Saduq, for example, on the issue of qada and qadar, or predestination and free will, or this idea of how much ability do I have, he says that if you cannot debate this issue because there is a tradition on this from the Ahlul Bayt. He was a believer in this concept of, for example, and I don't want to get too technical, khabar al-wahid, but or ahad, and this one narrator or one narration. And in that, now the other scholars also take this on board, but there's a context to which they accept it. Whereas if he found it from the Ahlul Bayt, he would take it on board, perhaps no questions asked. And people would argue that Shaykh al-Saduq may have had some classical akhbari tendencies. Putting all of that dialogue on the side, he was saying that you should not even delve into this argument. His student, Shaykh al-Mufid, academically criticized his teacher and said that, first of all, the hadith that he took is erroneous, it's not reliable. Number two, why can't we? Because Shaykh al-Mufid was someone who brought an approach of kalam theology in terms of rational approaches to try to understand many of these things. And so he differed very strongly on certain things with his teacher. That didn't mean he didn't respect his teacher. He had immense respect for his teacher. We need to figure out how to separate views and ideas and respect for people. We sometimes conflate this. We need to have respect for all people, at least within certain parameters as much as possible. But we can still differ. Do you know why this is important? Because after Shaykh al-Mufid came the likes of Shaykh al-Tusi, and Shaykh al-Tusi continued in the line of Shaykh al-Mufid and did not believe in some of the views of Shaykh al-Saduq, although Shaykh al-Saduq is a great scholar. Remember, Shaykh al-Saduq in his time, he wrote against the ghullat, the people who overinflated the Ahlul Bayt, and he also spoke against the ones who do taqsir. You know, when you cut the hair in a Hajj or Umrah, for example, or the nails, it's called taqsir. To cut what? The position of the Ahlul Bayt. So he spoke to the people who raise them too high and the ones who take them too far low and they don't respect their position. He actually said a moderate approach in terms of that. But at the same time, and that's how it should be perhaps, we should be balanced. But at the same time, his students disagreed with him. The ones who came after, Shaykh al-Mufid, Shaykh al-Tusi, said he was wrong. Shaykh Saduq was wrong. About what? About, for example, Sawan Nabi, or Sawan Nabi. That is this idea that the Prophet may have made some mistakes. That you will find in some traditions, even in our books, that the Prophet made a mistake where, for example, he's in the second rak'ah of Salah, and he recited not only tashahhud, but he also recited salam. And when people made him aware, he finished the salah and he did two sajda saw. And he did it this way. And now the istidlal that they give, like the likes of Shaykh al-Saduq and others, is that they don't make mistakes in the sense of the actual revelation, but they may make some mistakes, or Allah may cause them to make mistakes. Why? So that you and I know how do we fix mistakes. And the scholars afterwards, Shaykh Mufid, Shaykh Tusi, and many others said, well, there's a lot of logical problems here. Why? Because if Allah made the Prophet do certain mistakes here, how do you know which mistakes or in revelation or in his personal life, number one. Number two, then Allah would have to make him do every single mistake possible so that you and I would know. Why only select scenarios? So they disagreed with him. But then come to the next stage, which is Shaykh al-Tusi. When Shaykh al-Tusi, who's after Shaykh al-Mufid, he comes to the limelight, he was seen as being given a sanad from Imam al-Zaman himself, that is the Imam of the time, the 12th Imam, in which he was born from the prayer of the Imam himself. And when this happened, for 100 years after Shaykh al-Tusi, no one had the courage to actually differ with his views. And what you may find was Shia fiqh, some argued, was declining. Shia jurisprudence was declining because the people in connection who had connections with Shaykh Tusi at that time, they were all passing away. It wasn't until one courageous person came by the name of Ibn Idris al-Hilli, who from the mother's side, maternal line, he was the third descendant of Shaykh Tusi, interestingly enough. And he came forward and he publicly disagreed with the opinions of his maternal grandparent or grandfather, that is Shaykh Tusi. And then people came and realized that now we can actually try to add to the body of literature. This is how progress in ilm and adab expands. So you and I need to have a conversation with scholars around the world to say that yes, maybe these disasters happen and maybe there's some Islamic element there that you may be looking at that we may not be looking at. But at the same time, have we had a conversation about climate change? Have we had a conversation about what's going on in the world? Where I told you John Doerr, who's the main investor from Kleiner Perkins in Silicon Valley, who's invested in Google and every other Silicon Valley company, who's endowed over $1 billion to Stanford to build a new climate change school, or it's the owner of Patagonia giving off his company for the world to raise awareness about climate change. Have we told them about what we are doing to the environment and what impacts that may have? And that dialogue needs to happen. So what are the things that we can do? Number one is ilm, in terms of having knowledge of what we need to do, number one. Number two, it's ikhtiyar. These are Islamic principles, knowledge. Ikhtiyar meaning effort. And the third is tawakkul. You see, knowledge is very important. I was reading about the history of the tsunami that happened in 2004 on Phuket beach in Thailand. Now, in Thai, by the way, H is after a P is silent. So they don't use the F, PH as we do. They use P and H is silent. Anyways, there was a young boy and his family who were vacationing from England on that beach when the tsunami was about to happen. And this young boy who was 10 years old had done a class just a couple of weeks ago that saved hundreds of lives. What was that? He was standing at the beach and he noticed that the water receded very quickly. That is, it went lower than low tide. The water that, as you know, it comes back and forth on the beach. It went way out towards the sea. And he said, whoa, this is not normal, number one. And then number two, he noticed foam bubbling in the middle of the ocean. And as soon as he saw that, he remembered what he learned in his class 2 weeks ago. He started telling people, evacuate, leave the beach. And when he did this, hundreds of people left the beach in droves. And it was just a few moments before that entire tsunami struck. But this was because he was taught in his class that this is one of the signs that many people on the ground that miss, and that is one of the telltale signs of something catastrophic about to happen, that the water recedes tremendously and it recedes beyond low tide. And at that moment in time, when this happens this quickly and you notice those signs, know that something is about to happen because the force of the tsunami is pulling up all the water. And so he was able to save hundreds of lives due to that because of the ilm, the knowledge that he had. This is important because remember, in Islam, if you save one life as per the Quran, you save all of humanity. So it's important for us to reflect on that and keep that in mind. We should be educating people, especially Muslims who may be in other parts of the world where these things may not be known. We're privileged to live in this part of the world where we're aware of some of these things. And some of these things are very important for us to help save lives. Had that young man not been there, perhaps many people would not be alive from that tragedy and that devastation. So Allah give us ilm. And He said, utilize that ilm and utilize that knowledge. So we should have disaster plans in place to mitigate the effects. The second thing was with respect to this notion of ikhtiyar. Allah has given us the ability. And the prime example of this is the story of Nuh. Nuh alayhi salam, Allah didn't just miraculously send the flood automatically and said, Nuh and your people, you're saved. You and the animals and some select people are saved. No, Allah made Nuh build the ark. There was effort involved. Allah made Nuh go through all of those steps and all of those procedures. And that is a lesson for you and I, that when a disaster is about to happen, we need to make preparations. We don't just say, Allah will take care of everything. Yes, Allah will take care of everything after we exert our effort, the way Nuh spent and built that boat and that ark, I should say. In fact, the people were laughing at him. And they said, where is this water going to come from? It's like saying, for example, the flood's going to come in a place where there's typically drought. I remember when I was in Los Angeles, people were saying that, it doesn't rain much there. It's not like us in Florida. And so Nuh is building this ark and people are laughing at him. But Allah desired that he put the effort in this. Or Dawood, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the likes Allah says about Dawood and Sulaiman. And the story where Dawood was living off public treasury, and Allah says, I love to Dawood, I love the one who works. And Allah teaches him how to make iron. Ya mulayyin al-hadida li Dawood. That is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught Dawood how to do it, and he loved that exertion of effort from his servants. And the third element is tawakkul, Islamic principle, that we should have trust in Allah. But when should we have trust in Allah? Does it mean that we have total hands-off trust in Allah? Of course we trust Allah, but trust means after you put in the effort. That after I do the investment in my business, after I do the hard work in my work, after I do as much as I can and exhaust every effort in order to be successful, then I leave it up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is where the beautiful elements of the equation come. And that is the thing that we need to reflect on. Those lines, as I conclude right here, that Imam al-Hussein on the plains of Karbala, the narrations say, he says a line, Ilahi qad wafayta ufu bi'ahdik. He said, my Lord, I have fulfilled my responsibility. Now you fulfill yours. With that, I pray once again that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects you and your family, and inshallah reunites us very soon in the best of health, wealth, and happiness. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.